All right, well, welcome. This is the first kickoff of the February 22nd. Yeah, Filecoin Plus Notary Governance Sync. We're going to be walking through the following big ticket items. So if you're live or you're watching this, we're going to briefly go over quick intros. If you're first time on the call or you just want to say hi, please do so in chat. We'll take a minute to call that out. We'll talk briefly about metrics. And we're going to spend a lot of the time today talking about the notary activity with open issues. So this is the election that's coming up, how to apply, what the rubric looks like, the changes from last year, and really dedicate some time to that. And at the end, we're going to save some time for issue 407, which published last night. Make sure that modification of removal is on your radar and give you time to talk or give feedback on it. So with that, let's say a quick hello. My name is Kevin. I run the community here and making sure that you have the face and support. Deep, who's on the line, takes care of everything with the data flows, the client verifications. He's got his fingers in everything and just a general wonderful human being. Galen is also that human wonderfulness, but he's out of the office this week. So Galen, if you're watching this recording, we miss you, buddy. And see you next week. If this is your first time on the call, if you've never joined us before, this is a great time to pop into Slack or pop into the chat and just say, hi, my name's Kevin. I come from this org. I'm either interested in it, new, and we'll reach out and say hi. Make sure that you just have somebody that has your back. Or if you've been coming to these for a while, also a good chance to just say hi, chat with your peers. So with that, let's take a quick look at what the metrics look like week over week. We're not going to spend a whole lot of time because we have a lot to cover with the election. What I want to call out is we got 2 hours faster on allocating that DataCap, which is good. You know, these incremental progresses really start to add up. And then we're 3 hours slower to the first response. So we're really rushing it out the door once we get into it, but taking some time to actually acknowledge it is one of the things we could work on as we go forward. So we'll have that on the radar after the election for some ideas on how we can get our first response to the people that submit tickets right out the door as quickly as possible. And lastly, just calling out, network's still growing, 0.20 petabytes, looking good. So with that, the open activity in the Notary dashboard, we have 21 LDNs awaiting signature. So if you want to multitask or get off this call, this is a list of like what's open right now. Big thank you to the players that are just really moving those grants across the board. And we'll talk about this more in the scoring on how that will just greatly benefit you as you go through. So let's get into the elections. 9 minutes of just generalness. Before we do that, Deep, is there anything that you wanted to talk to on metrics? And then we'll turn it over to the community if they have any input or questions.
I just wanted to flag that I think like the last couple of weeks have been like pretty disproportionate, or actually even like the last month we've seen like tremendous growth. I think overall coming into the new year, there was a huge rise in the amount of DataCap being allocated to like LDN notaries. Part of that was because of the Slingshot Restore program, but a lot of that was also because just a lot of companies coming out of the woodwork and you know our mentality shifting towards giving people a chance to get DataCap and do something with it. But what's been interesting over the last few weeks is a lot of deals are actually happening. And so unlike the rate of utilization in the past, I'm starting to notice a trend where more and more DataCap is being used faster. And so that's awesome. So for those of you that are involved with that directly, you know, feel free to share like learnings, takeaways in here or even in the Slack once it's back up. It would be great to see what else we can be doing across the board to support incoming clients and making them successful once they receive DataCap. Thanks, Kerry.
Well said. Anybody on the call, just taking a quick moment if you had any questions about the metrics or anything you wanted to ask about. Now's a great time. All right. So let's talk about that election that just kicked off yesterday. So as a quick review on the timeline, I know we've published these, but it's just always helpful to check in on this first. It's open this week through March 4th. After the March 4th closure, we're going to be going through and taking time to score each one of those applications. And we'll take time on this call to show you what that rubric looks like for scoring. So it's very clear on like what those categories look like on the applications. And then when we meet back up in 1 month time on the 22nd, we'll take some time and kind of announce who was selected, kind of the criteria, and make sure that's open as possible. A couple of the FAQs that I've got in like DMs so far, I thought I would post here just to launch out so that this could be as easy as tagging as possible. And I'll link this here in the video. The first is if you've never been working with the Filecoin Plus program before and you're curious what these elections are, you're going to start by reading this doc, and I'll link this in the YouTube video below. It's a 5-minute read. It will explain every question you may have about this at a basic level, and then you can come back and get some more specifics on these calls. The second is that all dates will be recorded as of Pacific time zones. When we say March 4th, we mean March 4th Pacific Daylight Time. So you look in the repo, those are the times to shoot for. We're going to say that there's no applications accepted after that timeline. So this way we can reward people for like getting that in. And if there's any kind of extenuating circumstances, take that on a case by case as they may come up. The applications will receive a read receipt in GitHub. I'll show you how that works on this call, but just as a heads up, you won't have to wonder, did we receive it? We'll acknowledge it, we'll leave you a note, and that way you can just kind of sit back. If you are an existing notary and you would like to participate in the program going forward and receive new DataCap, you will need to reapply. It won't carry forward, but your data will. So if you still have remaining DataCap and you'd like to continue to use it, you won't have that just redacted once we do this new election. But if you'd like to receive more, you will need to participate in this election. If you have any questions about this public, here's the Slack. If you have anything sensitive, like you might have questions about putting in that doc, feel free to DM me and I can help you with that and work through it. So with that, I'll kind of pause and we're going to really dive into this in detail, but at a very high level. Does anybody have any questions or want to discuss any of the issues on this? Right. So let's take a look at what the application process looks like. When you come to the Notary Governance repo under the Filecoin directory, you will then see this page, Filecoin Project Notary Governance. I'll put this link here after the call on YouTube in the comments below, so you can actually get this. When you log into this repo and you click on Issues, you can then create a new issue, and you'll see two types. Modification, this is if you had feedback for the community or you want to discuss an issue with everyone. We're going to do Notary Application for the purposes of this. And once you click on that Notary Application, you can then rename that title, and then you'll be asked to fill out some questions about your organization and your purpose within this. So when you're filling this out, there's no standardization, just a request, just to make sure that we write this in the right place. Just saying that you have a notary application makes it really helpful to find your issue, your organization name, and region. We're going to be taking all this, and as we show you, putting these into scoring rubrics. So if you have any questions about this, feel free to come in the Slack and ask away, or feel free to ping me on Slack and we can go. Now, a quick overview about what you're applying for. So you want to become a notary, you want to get this data allocation. Just as a quick check-in on what the role is. So those of you that have been doing it, you're very well aware, just to kind of check in on how we see this and how you kind of track it if you're new, is that you're acting as a fiduciary of the Filecoin network. And what that means is somebody who can be like a trusted advocate and gatekeeper and guard of this resource to make sure that it's allocated in a correct and stable way. So notaries are the ones that look at the allocation requests for data that come in and say, hey, this person is verified, they're who they are, and we trust that this based information is something that we can grant that data to. And then you're making sure that it's going out equally. So we're not self-dealing, we're not making this go to like one large account, but we're spreading this out. And then you're making sure that this flow is monitored, like how we agree in the community. If you've never been a notary before and you're curious who is, we have an active repository that lists everybody who's been taking part. And then last time we published this list, just for SA, we kind of have just above 20 people that are participating as notaries right now. And we're kind of exploring how many people to take on in the next round. So we'll be taking a look at that. So I'll pause for a minute if anybody on the call wants to ask a question about like, what are the roles of the notary? And again, if you haven't seen this before, a great place to start is by reading this doc. It's an article, it's a blog, it's a quick 5-minute read, but it covers all of these responsibilities in more detail. Hey, feel free to jump in anytime. Great, so you've gone onto GitHub, you've filled out your application, you've hit submit, it will create a brand new issue in GitHub. And then what I'll be doing is I'll be taking that application on GitHub, and I will then be taking all of the categories filled out and then putting them into this rubric template. And if you're curious to see that template, we'll share this slide deck below. and you can click the link. And what this will do is it will take you to a public rubric that you can see that's been all zeroed out. And you can look at the categories that we're basing these applications off of. And each one of the things that you fill out here, like stake exposure, industry reputation, this gives us a way to kind of demonstrate it's not just in the box on how we're looking at these fields. It's all been weighted. All the weights are on GitHub if you want to look at them. But essentially what we're going to be doing is filling out all that data so that it gives a clean score for each application. So somebody might have a substantial time commitment, but not a lot of stake. So what we can do is we can balance these out with weights and go through the application. So if you're curious about what your application will look like once we begin to score those rubrics and really review it for a fair and effective election, this is the template and we'll have that linked for you. There was some changes to this template. So what I'd like to do is kind of call out those changes. And these were made in issues a few weeks ago before we started the election. And those have to do with engagement in the program. And this is a little different than last election on the second round. And what we mean by that is we're looking at how much time a notary applicant can take part in the program. So when you're going to be looking at this, the categories that we're going to be filling out is like, okay, do you have around 30 minutes per week, averaged on the course of a month, to log in, approve applications, to kind of vet and get back to somebody? And then as the time commitment that you have to the program expands, more points will be awarded. So somebody who only has 30 minutes will be rated a 1, rated on a score. But if someone has 8 hours a week to really kind of be like an advocate for answering Slack messages, we know that those notaries are always responding to tickets that come up. The reason why this is important is this is what's going to drive some of these metric numbers about the community. So if they turn in an application, what we can do is we can respond faster than 6 days if we have a more engaged community that's receiving it. So just want to call this out because this is a little bit different than how we did it last year. We're going to have like a leaderboard that kind of tracks this information going forward once that RFP and grant stood up. And we can actually see, okay, out of the notaries that we have selected, these notaries have been the most active, closing out the most tickets, responding to the most things. And we can just say, yeah, clap, thank you, and really kind of have this place to say, like, this is a really good job. You're helping the network. So just making sure that this change was on your radar. We close this issues. I'm going to pause. And if anyone has any questions on this, this would be a great time to flag them. Deep.
I have a question for you, Kerry, which I think some people are going to be thinking, which is there's a decent variety in like these levels specifically for engagement, right? Like there's like 30 minutes to the low end, which is effectively, it means you're coming to the governance calls and then you've got 8 hours, which means it's quite likely that you work for an organization that is probably making it part of your day job, or for some reason you have like time for almost like a second job, almost like a part-time kind of a thing. And so I kind of think it might be interesting to chat through what the implications are there. It's not that necessarily you'd be more or less of a notary per se, but like we want to reward the people that, or not reward, I think reward is the wrong word. We want to give people the platform if they're being given the platform in their organizations to be a leader in this space, to also do that here and sort of make the most. Like we've had a couple of notaries who have worked for organizations where it's literally their job to participate here. And so we want to make sure that you're given the platform, the leverage to contribute in your maximal capacity, which then leads to the next question, which is how are we actually going to track it, right? Because some people might just say, oh, I have as many hours as I want. And so, Kira, I know you have some thoughts on this. Might be good to chat through like sort of some of the pulse checks that you want to be focused on and doing over the next sort of several months.
It's a great question, Deep. Thank you for that. So we don't have like a stopwatch timer, and we don't have like a firm fixed way. So what I mean by that is when we talk about the 30 minutes, it's not like we're going to log into YouTube, pull analytics and say like, did you watch this governance call, and then give you credit like some kind of online coursework that you're doing. It's more of like, are you somebody that when an issue comes in, when a question comes in, you are active in responding to it? And what's nice is with the different regions covering the world, there might be a question that comes in a time zone where someone's asleep. We know that we're going to have one part of the world that's covering down on that. So what we'll be doing is probably pulling the response times from like GitHub, response times from Slack, we're going to be looking at, yeah, if you can come to these notary governance calls, that's great. We'll probably pull that and put some kind of metric that's just manually counted for the start of it. But to start, as we start to work this out, we're probably going to weight it more off like, are you somebody that when we come into the closures, we know we can count on you? Deep, I'll kind of hand it back to you if there was anything you wanted to add from like more specifics that I might be able to look at.
No, I think that's pretty accurate. I think the only other thing I'd add is there's probably elements to expectations around TTD and general responsiveness as well that will be reflected in like current metrics that we capture. I think like in general as a community, we've been working towards trying to get those numbers down quite a bit, right? Like I think we're targeting like within a day for smaller DataCap allocations when possible, within a week and less like 3 days for like larger data set notary applications. And so I expect notaries that are self-selecting into like the L3, L4, L5 levels of this particular row to be able to dedicate the time at a much higher magnitude and represent the rest of the community much more actively on those fronts.
Should have sent a poet. Love it. Jesse, I see a hand up. Floor is yours.
Hey guys, yeah, just a quick question. So about the time per week that we are willing to dedicate, does it affect the amount of data cap that is given to the notary? Like, I think it might not be sensible to give the same amount of data cap to someone who will dedicate like 30 minutes versus someone who will dedicate like 8 hours.
Yeah, it definitely is reflected. It's not like the highest weight factor, but it's part of the math calculation. And so effectively, I'll send you a link to this on GitHub as well, if that would be helpful. But basically, this is one of the factors that go into figuring out like the math calculation for how high somebody scores. And then we basically use the floor level on that, as well as like a limit from like a reputation and past performance as a notary to figure out like the eligible maximum. So effectively, you end up getting either the amount of data cap you requested, like net new, or the eligible maximum for you based on like other factors that then result in getting that new data cap effectively, right? And so it definitely does impact it. And the expectation is that, like you said, it probably should, like somebody with a lot more time should be expected to make a lot more applications. I think the only thing that I would flag here is that the variance, like in the proposal where we introduced this thing, we kept the weight a little bit lower just because a lot of how data cap is going out today is actually through the large data set notary process, where like it's almost, I think we had like 8 or 9 petabytes of data cap that was available for direct allocation from individual notaries, and we're like nearly 300 through LDNs. And so I expect that will probably stay similar, where like a lot more people are interested in engaging via LDNs and giving data cap at a larger scale there. And that's not directly impacted by this. And so that would be the main difference. But there's also no limit there for a notary that's choosing to be extremely active and be proactive about client onboarding. Does that sound good?
Sounds good. Yep, sounds good. Thanks, Dee.
And that also reminds me, it's probably worth flagging that we talked about this in the last election cycle, but we haven't talked about it for this one, which is, say you are a notary that received 1 petabyte, and 1 petabyte is the maximum data cap that you can be allocated. Say you have 500 of that left, 500 dibs left. You apply this time, you get reallocated 1 petabyte. You're just going to be topped back up to your eligible maximum. So it's not that you'll get net new 1 petabyte, but if your eligible maximum is 1 petabyte, you'll go back up to 1 petabyte. But if your eligible maximum is higher than that now, and you requested 1, then you'd go back to 1.5 petabytes. And so just calling that out, this shouldn't be surprising to anybody that's participated in elections before. And if you're net new, then it doesn't impact you. So hopefully just a formality mentioning that so people aren't caught off guard.
Great flag. So this is the last slide we have on the election, just kind of framing this before we go on. I'm going to pause here and see if there's any other general election questions or topics that you'd like to discuss related to the election. This would be a good time before we move on to new other issues. All right, feel free to come back. Oh, just in time, just in time. Eric, floor is yours.
It's just in time, right? Okay, I'm just checking. So for the previous course, we have a total 7 notaries in China's Chinese Greater China. So how many for this time? Because with last meeting, I heard so Deep says probably like 10 or so. Do we have the exact figures?
Oh yeah, great question. So I think right now we will probably follow the same maximums, but we're going to add to them the same as we did before. So I'm about to open up an issue on this, Eric. But I think you should expect the numbers to go up. Like in general, we talked about this like maybe the 4 weeks ago call, where like there should be a general goal to continue increasing the amount of notaries, and we'd rather have many more notaries than not take people, just because I think it'll be compelling to continue growing the community, finding people that are interested in engaging at a smaller level versus a larger level. And that's also why we added in that row, and we talked about adding that row. So I think we should likely expect the number to go up. Part of this is also like watching for signal. So hopefully, like, you know, we get a ton of applications, and we can also be open-minded about adjusting them as needed. Yeah.
Okay, that's cool. Okay, next one is the because I saw the columns which says how many hours you will spend on the communities and how many hours you will work for as a notary. So where should I put this effort? I mean, so as a existing notary, where should I comments and put this?
Is it not in the? It should be in the notary application. Maybe in my update I didn't add the field for it. Let me just make sure. I'm taking a look.
Be there.
Maybe in the application form, I think.
Yeah, I think so. We made a bunch of changes to merge in the agreements in the application template, but let's just make sure this is there. Oh, I see Kira is pulling it up faster than I am, so I'll just watch.
Okay.
Service level agreement right here. Eric,
it's right towards the bottom. It's like the second to last question there.
Yeah, maybe I'd lost.
If you can see,
level agreement. Yeah.
There it is. Yeah, exactly.
Okay,
and so just for returning notaries that are looking to get topped up on that DataCap, you are expected to file a new application. Feel free to, you know, copy over stuff from your old one if that makes it easier for you, if it's still true, and saves you time. That's completely acceptable and totally fine. Just want to have you file in a new one because, as you know, the rubric's changing and we've added in some new fields, so you'll have to answer a couple of other questions. And it gives us the ability as a community to have an audit track record on how your application evolved over time, as well as for, you know, net new applicants that have applied before. It gives us an opportunity to see how the process itself is changing over time. So if you applied last year across the 2 election cycles that happened and you're applying again, seeing the outputs of those is beneficial for the rest of the community from a governance standpoint, to see how the rubric is affecting the eligibility of certain candidates, and we can continue to make adjustments to ensure we can grow sustainably as a community.
Okay, that's very clear. Thank you, Edith. Thank you.
Think you got him, Kara. I don't see any more questions.
You know what? 2 bullets in that gun, bud. I think that was set him up, knock him down. Well, Deep, I'm going to turn the floor over to you if you want to kind of walk us through the proposed modification change.
Yeah, awesome. So I do not see Molly on the call, so I'll do my best to represent her here. Molly opened up this issue yesterday after it came up in a couple of conversations. I don't know if folks were there for, I know definitely some of you were there for the Filecoin AMA that happened regarding snap deals last week. If you weren't, you should definitely check out the recording for that. Let me see if I can get you a link. AMA snap deals. But basically, there are a couple of questions around the dispute process there, and people wanted to learn a little bit more about how it worked. And so, of course, even though we have had a dispute process for a while, it's still open for adjustment, learning, interpretation, and so I think there's plenty of room for improvement. And so as part of that, one thing that came out was like, how are we leveraging FIP 28? So FIP 28, for those of you that don't remember off the top of your head, is a recent FIP that was passed or approved and will be shipping as part of the upcoming network upgrade, which I think is in March. And that effectively gives the community an option to remove DataCap from a client. And so that's not just total DataCap, so you can actually pick how much you're removing or remove all of it. And if you remove all of it, it also removes the verified client status for that client. And so it requires that 2 notaries sign, and then you pitch it to the LDNs via a template as well, and push it to them so that there's like more objective audit tracking available to remove that. And so you effectively end up getting 4 signatures in total to remove DataCap. It's also a little bit conservative at the start, at least, but it's a good takeaway as we sort of figure out how we continue to use these kinds of mechanisms to increase the leverage that we have to get things wrong if needed, so that long term we can get things right. And so what Molly's proposing here, as I understood it, is basically in the case that you find that a notary has provided DataCap to several clients, and then it's found that that DataCap was provided in bad faith, or that notary was acting in bad faith, and we're reaching the point where there's like a dispute against that notary, and we're likely to remove that notary status to begin with, then it should follow logically that the clients that end up also receiving DataCap from that notary should effectively be like double clicked. So effectively do the additional diligence as required to re-audit those clients. And in the case that it's found, like effectively it's a trigger to say, please re-audit. In the case that things go well, then it's fine and the client has DataCap and they're welcome to use it. But in the case that they're not, then this is basically just stating that as part of that dispute process against the notary, we do the check, and then we also remove DataCap from clients that are found to have basically exploited that notary or exploited the abuse of the Filecoin Plus system through that notary. And so effectively, I think this is like kind of not super controversial. It's basically just like double check the clients that a fraudulent notary may have given DataCap to. And in the case that they're found to be good, then no problem. In the case that they're found to have abused the system as well, then we recommend that like the community should move forward with removing DataCap. So I think that should be, hopefully not too controversial, but I'd love to hear if people have thoughts, ideas, or suggestions for this. I think there's like some question on how we'd implement something like this in the system, because of course there's some complexity here, but we can have those conversations once we are aligned as a community that this is worth doing.
I have a quick one.
What's up?
Can the client dispute the removal of the DataCap? And if yes, do we have like a certain process for that already?
Yeah, I think so. I think that is sort of part of the re-audit effectively, or like the re-verification. So effectively, I think like we'd in the process of like retesting the client, I assume that if it turns out that like notaries decide that, hey, it's like questionable, then we're effectively going through like due diligence again, right? And so I don't know, Jesse, we could either set it up such that like you effectively have that conversation before the removal, or you do the removal in the case that it's found, and the dispute option could also just be like, oh, just client reapplies for DataCap. This issue says, oh, like that client will be barred from future DataCap allocations. But I think if you're applying for DataCap again, then that like serves as like, oh, actually, I think the community got it wrong, or those notaries got it wrong. I'm a legitimate client. I have a lot of interesting business for Filecoin Plus. Like, please do due diligence correctly again. So I think there's two paths. Like we could either do it before the removal, or we could even do it after the removal. But I definitely think that it's a very valid point and that it should be an option.
Yeah, something to think about in the future.
Yeah. Do you have a preference for if you think it should be part of the before or the after? The risk with the before is basically that a client could go ahead and use the data cap while like a dispute is going on. But the after part is also like a pretty bad like client user experience. Like imagine being a client that like is just misunderstood, suddenly gets banned from this because they were accidentally with a notary that was abusing the system. And just to be clear, we've had like 3 attempts at disputes against notaries, but no like actual like formal execution of one yet, at least. And so there's not a lot of precedence, and so it's hard to say, like whether or not like it would make sense to act immediately versus delay acting, etc. So I would love to hear if you have any thoughts on that.
We don't really have any strong opinion about it, but I think since all of the notaries that are going to be elected, they have, they're the best at what they do. I think we should trust their judgment, and once the hammer is down, they just have to like reapply again and we test them again.
Sweet.
Yeah, I'm also agree with Jesse. So any evidence do we need to prove if notary found some bad clients or some wrong pattern of the distributions? Should we provide some evidence for the diligence?
Like not GitHub?
Sorry, pardon?
You mean like a different place where we can communicate with the client?
Yes. I mean, if we find something wrong with the DataCap, we vote to remove the DataCap. So the question why is, should we provide some evidence and give it to the community? Say, okay, this guy did something wrong. We should remove the DataCap. So I think evidence or the rate diligence should be do it before remove the DataCap.
Absolutely, absolutely agree. Okay,
yeah,
that makes sense to me. Go on. Sorry.
Yeah. And the question 2 is, so which part we should remove? Is the whole DataCap, like for example, the water address was allocated to 100 terabytes, and we should remove all, or the rest of them? For example, they were sending the deals like 50 terabyte, and the rest of the DataCap is 50. So the whole DataCap we will remove it, or only the rest part?
Yeah, I think those are both good points. Addressing the first one first, which is like how would we do the audit and make it available to the community? So I think in the original FIP, we had this conversation around like whether like what the standard should be such that it's worthy of tracking down in the future. And that's why we decided to include the root key holders, is that typically root key holders are not very plugged into the community. And so root key holders today effectively react by like somebody from our team or somebody in the Fil Plus channel basically pinging them and being like, hey, like, can you look at this? Or root key holders help here. And they eventually sort of like read through the issue in the Notary Governance repo and then like action it. So just having that means that like as a community, we will have an issue, we will have documentation, we're publishing that publicly so that a root key holder that doesn't have context can read that, learn what's happening, and react to that appropriately. So I think that part will sort of be handled. And I think that what you're saying is that ends up meaning that we need to do it before we do we need to do a re-due diligence or re-audit before. And I think that makes sense. But maybe what we can do is we can effectively like put a policy that says like, client like best effort if possible, stop deal making while there's a dispute open, or please respond to us within 24 hours or 48 business hours, or expect that we'll remove the data cap. And so we could use something like that to ensure that the process is expedited and we don't wait too long. So I think that makes sense. Let me know what your thoughts are on that.
Okay, that makes sense.
Okay, and then for your the second thing that you brought up, which is like the amount of data cap that we remove. I think that in general, that is flexible and we should use it. But in this specific case where we're basically saying that, oh, it's likely that a client abused the system as part of the notary abusing the system, I would suggest that we should just remove all the data cap, and that's fine. Because we're effectively saying that even after, so with what we just talked about, even after a second due diligence process or second verification process, it was found that the client should not have received the data cap. So I think removing all of it makes sense. Again, I think Filecoin Plus community is open. You're welcome to apply again. Like it says here that, client will be barred from future allocation. But I think, like, as Jesse pointed out, there must be a way for a client to say, hey, no, you got it wrong, or reconsider. And so I think there needs to be some mechanism for that long term. Maybe that mechanism is applying for a LDN or something where more notaries can participate again in the due diligence or something like that. But I think the default behavior should be removing all data cap.
Yeah, because if the client did the bad things, but the storage provider, that will be the disaster when removing the data cap, because a lot of the coins was pledged in, and also a lot of work did by the storage provider. So it's unfair with storage provider when the client was having bad things,
Yeah, I think that makes sense. So just want to call out that the removal of this data cap is actually from the client address, not from the existing deals. So this would be before the storage provider receives the deals, whatever the balance is left on the client address, that would be removed.
Yeah.
So the storage provider is not impacted by this yet.
That's fair. That's fair. Okay. Understood. Cool. Thank you.
Awesome. There's also unrelated some conversation in the chat around more notary availability in Korea. We have an attendee that mentioned that Korea's IPFS business is developing extremely fast and has scaled a lot. Do we have plans to select notaries in Korea? And the response is effectively, yes, definitely. We already have one. We have Asia, like the rest of Asia, not including the China region, as its own quota of notaries. And so definitely looking forward to more applications. And on that note, we've got a couple of notaries from Japan, from Singapore, from other regions in Asia. It'd be great to continue to build out more diverse selection. So if you are based in one of those regions and interested in participating and impacting the Filecoin Plus program, now is an awesome time to get involved. Sweet. Okay. I actually have a topic here that I wanted to bring up, which has not been filed yet in terms of just open discussion. So one thing that I've been, trying to meaningfully track down is basically how do we figure out that a client's allocation plan is actually being executed on correctly. So especially in the LDNs, a lot of clients will come and say, oh, I'm going to work with X storage providers, make Y replicas of the data. And then we say, sure, that sounds good. And then we just watch to make sure they don't go afoul of the general guidance, but we don't actually do are they following what they said they would follow? And I'm not also sure how much it matters, but something that's interesting is a lot of the LDNs claim to be bringing pretty public open data that should be openly retrievable for everyone, and claim to be working with storage providers that they are of high reputation and offer a high availability for the data that's being stored. However, there's hardly anybody checking that. And even if they are, as far as I know, retrievals aren't landing up on chain. So there's no way for us to, as a community, sort of aggregate, yes, it makes sense. This client is doing well, or this search provider is doing well. Both of these people are gaining reputation inside Filecoin Plus and should be rewarded for that, or should be given a bandwidth for that. And so I don't know how many of you are familiar with the DealBot service, but in Slingshot, which is a separate program that I'm involved in, we give rewards to people that effectively store large amounts of data and make them available to anybody in the world. And the way we check the availability aspect is we actually run a service that tracks attempts to retrieve that data over time. And based on that, we adjust whether or not people are storing things in good faith or not storing things in good faith. And effectively, what ends up happening is we calculate like a metric called retrieval success rate. So for every attempt on like random sampling of data, we attempt to retrieve the data, and if it's successful or not, we end up paying out a different reward. It influences the amount of rewards available to that client. And so what that does is effectively it gives us a measure of for specific search providers and for specific client and search provider combinations, data is available or not. And it could be interesting to bring something similar to the Filecoin Plus network. So for completely open data or like data that's claimed to be open, we could run our own little deal bot that tests against it and helps clients and search providers build reputation. And I could see this like having two massive benefits. One is that it gives us like the Filecoin Plus opinion on the availability of data stored with certain search providers. And it gives us the ability to create, like have more data to track reputation for search providers and provide that to reputation services. And that's interesting because for net new clients coming to the network, they'd have something to look at. And they'd have some basis to go off of like, yes, like this search provider meets all my needs and seems to be high reputation, and I can work with them with confidence. And it gives confidence to notaries that are working with clients that might be coming in from the same flow, whether that's the same kind of business development or the same people that are working on multiple projects. It gives us the ability to say, okay, as a client, you've earned reputation by following through on what you said you would with a high degree of compliance with your original plan. And therefore, we should give you, again, opportunity to do more with that or to be more successful on the network over time. And that's also interesting. But I think the other side of this is also gives us the opportunity to get much more clarity on whether or not, in the case of LDNs, clients are doing what they claim they would. And it gives us more automation around auditing. So if a notary sees that, okay, like a client said they would store data with 10 search providers, they were in like 10 different regions, but it's never retrievable, even though the client said it was public data, then what's the point of giving more data cap there? Like, why should that client continue storing data if with those same search providers, if those search providers are not providing them the option? And so one, it serves as a warning system for client to say, hey, like, why don't you find different search providers? These ones don't seem to be meeting your needs. And then two, in the case of unchanged behavior, it stands as like a good source of due diligence to say, okay, like this client seemed to be focused on making data available, but through repeated attempts and data gathering, we're seeing that that's not actually happening. And they're consistently choosing a path that results in the data not being as available. And so we shouldn't continue to provide data cap. And so, yeah, that's something I want to talk about. See, you know, how people react to that, what people think. I'll open up a discussion topic on this as well. So those of you watching the recording will have a place to go and add your thoughts. But yeah, for those of you in the room, if you have any immediate reactions to that, would love to hear them. All right. I'll take that as at least not yet, which is totally acceptable. Looking forward to engaging on that on Slack or on GitHub or wherever is appropriate for you. Cool. Any other things that people want to flag or anybody wants to bring up today? Kira, is there anything missing? Anything we didn't get a chance to chat about with regards to the elections?
No, I feel pretty good about this, Steve. I appreciate you spending so much time on the modification of the new flags. It goes a long way. And then also just having something in writing, if this was your first time watching it and you were just curious about the notary election, I think the foot stomping I would do is that there is a Slack. And any question you have, go ahead and put it there. Anything you just, hey, I don't want to post in a room with 1,000 people, feel free to DM me. I'll be happy to help out. I think that's why I could be here. So with that, I'll be turning it over one more time, and then we'll say Auf Wiedersehen.
Nothing for me.
Cheers, everyone.
Thank you so much, guys. Have a great rest. Awesome.
All right. Well, hello. Welcome to the fourth Notary Governance call of 2022, February 2022. 22, lots of twos. Maybe that's the tongue-tied way of saying this. This is the second call today, so we're glad to have you. And here's a very high level of what we're going to talk about on this call. Very quick time for introductions, just a quick way to say hi in chat. You can see my terrible icebreakers that I tried to get to work. Or if this is your first time joining in, I can't see the guest list right now. Great opportunity. We'll give you time to say hello and introduce yourself. On this call, we're going to go through metrics really quick this week. That way we save a lot of time for talking about the upcoming notary elections that are starting off. And we're also going to take some time to talk about FIP 28 and a modification to remove DataCap that you might see in the GitHub repo. We're also going to save lots of time at the end, and we'll also allocate time between each section of slides for questions. So this session is meant to be very talk back and forth, ask questions. So if you feel more comfortable in chat, please use it. If you're watching this on YouTube, we'll talk about a way that you can message us on Slack to really get in touch. So with that, quick hello. My name is Kevin. I work on the community elements of the Filecoin Plus program. Galen, who's off this week, runs our large data sets. And Galen Deep is more of our jack of all trades. He's running the DataCap flow, the client verification, and helping with all the resources as we go forward on that. So we kind of serve as the stewards to make sure that this is here and working for you when you need it. If this is your first time on the call, this would be the time to walk in the chat. The great thing to say is hi, my name's Kevin, first time on the call, I'm from this, or anything you might want to say is a friendly hello. Or if you wanted myself or Deep or Galen to reach out and kind of just chat or give any questions, it's also a good way to just let us know who we are. Obviously, no pressure, but if you want it, great time to say hi. So with that, let's take a look at what's changed over the last 2 weeks. And with this, we're just going to look at these two slides. The first on this slide is we're pulling this from the interplanetary one, the stats, is I want to call out these three metrics. And we look at these every week, and this is kind of what we're striving to really prove on in 2022. And the first is that time to DataCap. So when someone applies, we're 2 hours faster. So we can all give ourselves that friendly golf clap. But as far as average time to first response, we're 2 hours slower. So what that means is we're taking a little bit longer to get to these applications. But when we are, we're making this moderate improvement on it. So as we start to have more projects built out, we'll talk more about how we want to track this going forward. But just to call this out, we're still trying to make progress on this experience for our clients that are using this data. So let's take a look at the notary activity taking place right now. It's been a really busy period between the Slingshot restore, everything after the new year. There's just been a lot of activity. So I just wanted to say thank you to you notaries that have really been on the front lines, really looking at this data and going through it. We still have quite a bit of open issues. I think it's 21 LDNs that are still waiting for authorization and really working their way through the system. And I know that a lot of these have delays with verification and assets. So thank you. If there's any issues that you need help on, or you have questions, or you want issues, please ping it for the community, or if there's anything Deep, Galen, and myself can do, please let us know, and we'll get in there with you. So that was really quick. That was 5 minutes of intros and metrics, which saves us all sorts of gummy bear level time for the notary elections. So before I go on to that, is there any questions about metrics or intros of the program before we start talking about the upcoming election?
I flagged this in the morning call, so I want to do it for the afternoon as well. But the main thing I want to call out is basically magnitude of DataCap availability, especially through LDNs, as well as utilization of DataCap, has gone up substantively in the last couple of months. So I know that we've been talking about this a little bit, but generally since November, the amount of DataCap being made available through LDNs is huge. We got a lot. We're close to 300 megabytes at this point, which is tremendous in terms of commitment to clients. But what's even more interesting is actually its utilization, right? So for a long time, we saw average utilization of DataCap was quite low. But in the last couple of weeks, we've seen quite a bit of traction on that front. Some of it I know is because of Slingshot Restore, but a lot of it is actually just organic clients that are coming in thanks to business development being done by notaries or search providers that are in the ecosystem. And so just a shout out to everybody to continue doing the great work that you're doing and supporting clients and making them successful on the Filecoin network. And let us know if you have any interesting insights on what's making that engine work or where you're hitting issues and how we can make it continue to work even better.
You're here. Thanks, Steve. All right, let's take a look at elections. So really what we're going to drill down is these 4 categories. We're going to talk about the dates. That way it's very clear, answer any questions on the date timelines. We'll talk about the application process, what goes into it, how you apply, any questions. We'll talk about scoring, how that works for all the applications that are received, looking at how those are weighted against each other. And then we'll talk about the expectations and some of the changes that you'll see with this 3rd round of elections coming up. So with that, here are the key dates. So right now, the elections are open. They'll be open until March 4th, which is next Sunday. After that date, we're then going to have 2 weeks, and that's the time on my side to go through and score all these applications that we've received. And we'll talk more about that scoring concept on this call. And then on the March 22nd meeting that we have, we'll publicly announce in the repos and on this call where the new rounds of notaries have been awarded to. I've gotten a couple of DMs, and so I thought it might be helpful to put some of those answers here. And I'll also post these as a pin in our in the Filecoin Plus Slack. So the first one is, if you haven't been involved in this before and you wanted to share this with someone who might be curious, where's like a doc you could send them that was not a repo? Because sometimes GitHub can be intimidating. So I just linked it in Slack, and I'll put this doc out later. There is a Filecoin docs section. It's a quick read, 4 or 5 minutes, but it's almost on like the explain it like I'm 5 level on like, what is the core concept? What does DataCap look like? So if you were looking for a doc to share with somebody about the program, that's the one to have. The second was time zones. So if it closes March 4th, what time March 4th? We're saying Pacific time zone. So that means that all applications should be in by midnight or 11:59 to be specific on that March 4th deadline. The question was, what if I have a conflict at work and I can't get this in for another week or 2? We're not going to be accepting applications for that, just for the complication of the scoring rubric. So be very mindful that this period is open from now until March 4th, and March 4th needs to be a hard deadline. So if you have issues or you're working for it, please contact me early, and we'll see what we could do to help or clear up anything. But please use this as a resource to like, however we can best help you with these applications to go through. I see a thumbs up. Feel free to interrupt me if that thumbs up changes to like 4 more fingers. But the other one is, hey, how do I know if you got my application? So when you apply, and I'll show you that process, I will go into the GitHub repo and I'll assign it to myself. I don't know if I'm going to leave you a comment just because I don't want to spam the ever-loving madness out of you, but you'll see that I've accepted it, and that will be like my way. And feel free to send me a ping as well. If you are an existing notary and you'd like more DataCap, you do have to reapply. And we'll talk about this at length on how that data works. I kind of use the analogy like if you have a can of DataCap and it's like 3/4 full, and you reapply, you're not going to have a can plus 3/4. You're just going to refill the top of your can. So we'll talk about a better way to phrase that analogy as we go through the deck. But essentially, if you are keen to participate, but is just a refresher, you won't lose your DataCap at the end of this election. This is just if you want to re-up and stay in the program. The last 2 have to do with comms. It's that if you have any public questions, feel free to hit it in Fil Plus Slack. If you have anything that was sensitive, I know some of the questions on there deal with amounts and transactions. Feel free to send me a DM, myself, Deep, or just me, and I'll be happy to get back to you. So with that, I'll take a quick pause and see if anybody has any questions on the high-level FAQs or the dates that we have coming up so far. Sweet. All right. If you haven't seen it already, this is the application for how you apply to be a notary. It's in the GitHub repository, and I will post the link into Slack, and I will open it up here so you have a way to kind of see it. But essentially, sorry, multitasking there. When you come into the GitHub repository, you will see this screen when you come to this GitHub repository. And under issues, you can then make a new issue, and you'll see right here, Notary Application. When you click on this, and we'll walk through what the screen looks like, you then get this new application that opens up, and you can start filling out all your information. It doesn't clearly ask for it, so if you could be specific in your naming convention, it'll really help out a lot. I'll be happy to come through, but just put something like, hey, Notary Application, organization's name, region. Otherwise, you might see me come back and rename it. If you do, nothing wrong with it. We're just trying to have some way to keep it separate from any of the other issues, that we just kind of have some clarity on that naming convention. So just to kind of circle back, if you want to apply, it's as simple as coming to the GitHub repository, filling out this new issue. Now, let's talk a little bit about the roles. So if you are keen to apply, this is a good time to kind of check in on how the community is looking at the role of the notary inside of the system. So at a very high level, the expectation is that the notaries are serving as fiduciaries. And we have the hyperlink, and I'll share it with the deck. And essentially what the fiduciary is someone who's serving in the best interest of the client. And so with this, the notaries are serving as the best interests of the program. So they're verifying that the data is allocated to worthy causes and in a effective manner. So this means like allocating DataCap that will subsidize, and all these lists right here, that we have trust with the people that are asking, that you are following up and not giving excess trust that would jeopardize the network, that you're following the guidelines, that we're doing this in a public way, so that these questions and discussions are happening on email or in GitHub or in Slack. So we have some kind of record and transparency with it. I think those are all staples of our culture that we're trying to push. And then right here to the right, this is the list of all the active notaries. I think if we took the time to count it, it's around 23, 24. I should probably get that set number. But essentially at the end of this election, we don't have a fixed number of how many capped notaries we're going to be pulling on. But we are going to be expanding this program. The goal for that expansion is by bringing in more individuals and organizations that want to participate and spend more time in this ecosystem, we can get more of that community effort. And remember, the goal is to drive down that time to receiving DataCap, drive down that time to responding to first new clients. So this can be something that's really fast, really efficient, and a seamless experience for the clients to start to come on board. So kind of pause if anybody has questions on the application or a very high level of what the notary responsibilities are. Great. All right. You turned in your application in the repo. You know what's coming on with the position. What happens next? So this is going to be the 2 weeks after March 4th. So from March 7th to March 18th, I'm going to be locked in a dark room. And what I'm going to be doing is I'm going to be taking all of those line items in the application, and we're going to be inputting them in this rubric template right here. I'm going to drop this into the chat we have running right now in our conversation if you wanted to follow along. And what you can see here is that in this scoring rubric, we've taken all the questions that are in that application. So right here, it says time commitment, describe the duration that you can associate. You've been working on the Filecoin project. You'll see that same line here, time commitment. And so then what we're doing is we're taking all of the answers that you've put and we're assigning a weight to each input that comes in. So if you take like the time commitment, your affiliation with the project, we can then give it a standardized score. So it doesn't have a subjective, it has like this weighted time, and it's a lot more fair. So if you can see right here, it's someone that's been in the program for over 6 months, over 1 year, over 2 years, 3 years. So that way it's like a little bit of a weighted tie-in. And so everything that you put in that report will then get put into these templates, and then we have a way from generating, okay, this is someone's application, they filled out these things, they're a score of 75 billion, fill out whatever number that comes. So this is how the scoring template's gonna work. This is the same process that we had last time. I just kind of wanted to pause in case this was new or somebody had some high-level questions on how this process works. Great. So there is a little bit of a change. For the notaries that are coming back from the second round of the third, we've added a new category, and we wanted to talk about that to make sure that this was aware and that when you're putting this on your application, you can kind of take a look at it. That is participation. So you'll see that there's a line item in the application now. And what it's asking specifically is how much time do you have to dedicate to the Filecoin Plus program as a notary? And so when we're asking for that time commitment, essentially what the question is how much are you willing to dedicate to being involved? So those of you that are on this governance call, you're taking time out of your day to be on this, listen, engage, participate, messaging in Slack. So if we have questions come up or new people come and they want to get involved, answering issues on the large data sets or in GitHub, and essentially just being there for questions. And what's nice, and one of the reasons why we looked at regions is a way to split this off, is it's effectively, we're one of the programs that's covering the entire planet. The sun never sets on what we're doing. So if we have individuals from all regions that have had this commitment, we can essentially guarantee that one of us will be at the keys 24 hours a day. So this is kind of a new important way to start looking at the participation in the notary program, not just the fact of willing to do it, but like how much time and how much can we count on you is kind of what we're looking to draw out of this question. So you can see from these groupings, we kind of have some rough timetables. So 30 minutes is like the basics. So if you were keen to become a notary and you were thinking about how much time, the very basic table stakes is like 30 minutes to an hour. Then it just kind of builds off it. And as you see these like L4, L5, like max scoring for this category, it's someone that's investing around 8 or more hours a week. This would be someone that's like truly driving change in the program. They're a thought leader, they have creative vision, they want to see things implemented, and they're modifying issues. So thinking about this from like, what are our expectations, like when you're filling this out? What we're looking for is not everybody to be these L4s and L5s, but realistically think like, yeah, I'm going to give 4 hours a week and that will be my signatures. And that's just really helpful to kind of lay out up front so there's no mixed communication as we go forward. And again, the whole goal is that we're getting these times down for our clients. If we're all engaged, we can really drive that. So since this is new, we kind of voted on this maybe about a month ago. I could dig out that GitHub repo if anybody wanted to see it again. So we kind of floated this, we discussed it, we got some feedback. So this is one of the big changes we had for the scoring for 2022. Just wanted to give some time to talk about this and answer any questions you may have. So I'll mute if there's anything that you wanted to ask. The floor is yours.
Everyone seems to love your changes, Kevin.
Take credit for that, bud. I was just the French fries with your Whopper, my man.
Actually, I gotta say shout out to Meg for this one, to be honest, who kicked off the initial discussion for service levels of notary engagement several months ago. So I think this is a step in that direction of sort of ensuring that notaries that do have the time are rewarded and given the bandwidth and the leverage in the platform to do that. And notaries that don't have as much time are still not constrained and still given the platform to help and support.
You're here, Meg.
I've got one question. You know what I'm going to say, Dave. How do we manage it? How do we track?
Great question. I know Kerry has some thoughts, so I'll let him go first, and then I'll add some.
Meg, what I've been putting together is like an Airtable dashboard that kind of has categories, and it will be like number of Slack messages, comments, issues that are responded. It's fuzzy right now, but it's going to be a manual process. So when we pull up the slides and we can show like number of issues closed, a lot of these can be like easily extrapolated from tickets. And a lot of these will be soft. Like, is somebody like clearly engaging in the program later? I think what we'd like to call out for now is like, if someone says, hey, I'm going to be putting like way more than 8 hours, and we give them an issue in the GitHub repo and it sits for 7 days, that would probably be more of the disconnect that we'd be flagging, less like, hey, give me your timesheet, you hourly employee, because we have to mark you down on your TPS reports. So it's not that.
No, of course. No, I understand.
Yeah. And I think, Meg, we also have additional, like, so that part is great because we get a lot of qualitative metrics from Kerry. He's been pinging a bunch of you as well, current notaries, and we've done like first pass of what collecting that data could look and feel like. So we're not flying blind on the qualitative front, but we also have a bunch of quantitative data, right? Like around who's approving what, how quickly are people approving allocations, or at least responding in GitHub. Like everybody's using a consistent GitHub account. We've got bots tracking literally every interaction at this point. We published that already on a per notary basis through like Andrew Hill's thing, as well as like the notary leaderboard that Alexander is working on, who's in the call right now, has received the grant to build a notary leaderboard. And so we're able to track these things and publish them, and also in some cases, help notaries be educated on how their performance is looking and sort of weigh them against that for future election rounds.
See a question in chat and asks, how will we calculate the time spent per GitHub issue, discussion, comments? I think that this is a little fuzzy. I think when we start to really get into this will get a little bit more wheels and go. But I think the big thing is it won't come down to like exact minutes. Like, hey, you responded to 3 issues. I think that's 5 mouse clicks equals 15 minutes. It's more like, hey, I'm going to check my Slack 2 or 3 times a day. Like, does something sit for 4 or 5 hours, or does something like sit for 4 or 5 days? And I think from that, that's how we'll be weighting it. And that's how we're kind of thinking about this. And so I think maybe the clarity that we're looking for in the applications at this phase, and we'll probably incorporate that feedback for next election, is just having you think, you being the notary applicant, is like, how much time do I plan to invest? That way we're not misaligned. It's almost like, do you want to get married, or do you just want to go for a walk in the park? I think we're just looking for that kind of like feedback right here, so we can kind of be aligned for it.
Yeah, I almost think that some of this is trend lining too, right? If you have a bunch of notaries that claim to be in like the L4, L5 bracket and have much higher objective engagement, doesn't have to be how much time you spend, but like the fact that you reacted to several discussions, or you were at every governance call, and then you have another notary who was also at that same level, but just had drastically different like trend lines in performance over time. It's more about saying that, like, look, just be honest about the time that you're willing to spend, or like benchmark yourself against the rest of the community. And let's be a little bit more transparent about the efforts that people can make or have in participating here, and let that correlate with a little bit with like the impact that you will be expected to have. And that's fine. This is not about saying that if you have less time, you shouldn't do it. In fact, I think where it's perfectly reasonable for us to have a massive pool of people that come in at the very low end of the spectrum, because we need that. We need people who are doing that too. Not everybody needs to be at the top end of the spectrum. And so I think I'm expecting for the first time we introduce this, a lot of people will be overly bullish about where they're at, and then it'll get corrected down over time, and that's okay.
Great question. Thanks for asking that, Sandra. All right. Well, I will have more opportunities for questions. So if you sit on this and then 20 minutes later, you're like, you know what? Feel free to flag that as we go forward. So with that, we're going to kind of change gears a little bit. Feel free to still ask any election questions or issues as we come back. We're going to take a look at one of the open issues that got started last night. We give Deep the floor to kind of introduce it. This has to do with FIP 28 and dispute resolution. So I'm going to link that as Deep kind of introduces it.
Yeah, so thanks to Molly for filing this one. Sorry that she can be here to talk through it herself, but of course you can engage with it directly on GitHub. Just as a precursor to this, I don't know if you were all aware, but there was a Filecoin AMA that happened last week on Thursday, where we talked a little bit about dispute and audit process for Filecoin Plus. And one thing that came up was like leveraging Fil Plus's latest FIP 28 and making that part of the more formal dispute audit process. And so specifically, as all of you are aware at this point, we had the option introduced to remove DataCap from a client. And what this proposal basically says is add to the official audit process to revalidate that clients that have received DataCap from a notary that is seen to be working in bad faith are indeed worthy of the trust that they were given in the system. So if, like more specifically, if a notary is found to be abusing the system, then we should be checking for all the clients they've given DataCap to, because there's a chance that they were potentially in on it, in which case like we want to action removing DataCap from them. And so the conversation this morning was a little bit more focused on the actual proposed process, like in what order would we do things. And so the solution is looking something like, if a notary is found to be acting in bad faith to the point where like, we're revoking their notary status, then all of the clients that actively have DataCap still that was given should go through verification again through the set of notaries that are available with some sort of time limit on that. Maybe 48 hours, maybe 72 hours. And that way, like clients are expected to sort of give as much data as possible or support their application, or effectively we can choose to remove DataCap for the time being. Two quick caveats. One, this should be a conversation with the client. Like it's possible that we, want to hear from them and make sure that we are giving them a fair chance to represent themselves. But then the second part here is that like in the case that a client is found to actually be also acting in bad faith, and to the best of our ability, we'd like to like ban them or bar them from getting additional DataCap in order to keep the program as effective as possible in identifying trustworthy clients. There's also aspect here in terms of like, we've never actually reached the point where like, we've had to like quote unquote fire a notary, remove a notary. We've had a handful of disputes filed. We've talked to them with the community in the past. We've especially come up in the past election cycle. We had a couple of cases where notaries had to provide additional information to make sure that they were eligible for becoming a notary again. And that was all fine and good. And I think that should be acceptable to continue that kind of process and make sure we're turning a good eye effectively towards like how these things are happening and ensure that we're able to provide the resources for the community, as well as come together as a group to agree on cases in which we think are fair or unfair uses of the tools and the power that's given to specific stakeholders. So yeah, I think just that last bit in red is very important. If the client data is found to be fake, inaccessible, or unfairly privileging a small group of SPs, the remaining DataCap allocated should be removed and the client should be barred from future DataCap allocation. Personally, I think that's relatively uncontroversial. I think what we need to figure out is the process by which we decide that and the right way to do that is fair both to other notaries as well as fair to that client. But yeah, I'd love to hear your opinions, your thoughts on this one, ways in which you think we could execute.
Maybe in the interest of making this video more fun for the people watching, I'll read the questions. I'll be like your Vanna White. The first one we have comes from Charles, and his proposal is a FIP for slashing the power for dishonest client and then a reduction of 90 days of the revenue. Do you want to speak to that one?
Yeah, so I think that also came up in the morning where like I think some notaries are concerned that it may have unfair or fair ramifications on storage providers. And so I think, Charles, while that might be a reasonable recommendation, I think that's kind of out of scope of this conversation. Like this is specifically for like the client and ensuring that they don't get the chance to continue running with excess DataCap. I do think it's worth thinking about like, how we want to deal with sectors in the case of like known abuse of the program, even once they've been committed. But that's, significantly more challenging and not something we've actively talked about before. And so, yeah, I think if you feel strongly about that, definitely recommend kicking off a discussion in the FIP repo or the Filecoin Plus repo, ideally, and maybe we can shape a FIP together and put it up for the community to think about. Okay, I want to keep it fun by reading the next one.
Hey, the most fun you could have. All right, so this one comes in from Mr. DeCastro. I'm going to mispronounce those names all day, sorry, but would it make sense to have a new role for that type of activity, like investigations, active monitoring? And the intent would be to not overwhelm notaries to lose focus.
That's an interesting question. I think this is part of a notary's job in a way, like validating a client. And so I think it's not dissimilar to like had that client applied again and they were just funneled to an active notary, whether or not that notary would have given them DataCap. However, I do think that it's probably worth like having like a rotating responsibility or something, right? Like so that the same notaries aren't always the ones getting pulled in to support this sort of functionality. So I think it's a good idea, and we should talk about like how we'd rope people in or what people would be roped in to be focused on that, as opposed to saying, oh, all notaries at large need to do due diligence. Maybe we can pick specific ones. Yeah, I'd love to hear. I'd love to hear what more of the other notaries think. I see the follow-up. Notaries seem to be more passive. The new would be more active. I actually don't know. I would say notaries are passive. I think notaries are more open-minded about what that first allocation looks like, and have recently been, more around like giving DataCap and watching to see how on-chain actions look, which I think in general are communities skewing towards that, and I think that's generally right in terms of where the network is at today. But I think they're also the ones that have to be active or will become active when the time comes to figure out what's actually happening and chase things down. And so, yeah. I've also loosely thought about Meg's suggestions for service levels and sort of applying them differently and saying, there might be some notaries that are more focused on audit stuff for investigation versus some notaries that are maybe more focused on BD or bringing that new clients in. And there's definitely opportunity to grow into that. So I still think it's like a valid suggestion. Charles, I saw you had unmuted for a second. I caught you. You want to share your thoughts?
Yeah, I would just like thinking that's too much work for notary doing the investigation. That's really a whole bunch of work, like chasing the DNS is valid, and I saw like maybe Galen, I don't quite follow who's the name, like sending the information to the clients, ask like on the Discord, like do you get this guy apply for the DataCap, and do you have this guy in your organization? That's really like a full-time job if you have so many applications, especially large data set. So yeah, I think it's maybe worth it to have an independent role working on it, because other notaries maybe like just make the judgment based on the fact we saw, right? Somebody already get this proof, like, okay, this client asked for this application. He is not a part of the organization. He doesn't have this one. And because we don't set up a bar for the notary about if you don't do this, do this, and you force all that, you'll be out of the member group. And quite frequently, I get sometimes like for me, I get 5 to 10 requests in 1 week. They ask me, Charles, please sign for me because you are the notary who are signing for us or something like that. So, yeah, I already like even when I was last week in the meeting, during the meeting to the Denver, like people send me a request, Charles, can you sign the request for me? I said, sorry, I don't have the ledger with me. I will be back on Sunday. On Sunday, the same person, not just 1, 2, or 3 person come back to me that Charles can sign for me. We're still waiting for the signature. So in this case, I really cannot do so much investigation for the new application. I don't have time, honestly. Just sign for the existing people who know who's qualified. It's already taken me lots of time.
Yeah, I think part of that comes down to reducing the overhead on a subsequent allocation front, though. Charles, like if we could automate more of subsequent allocations and only bring in notaries in the case that there's a requirement of additional dispute or audit, that could be a better use of time, right? We're not there yet, but that is something that I think is worth thinking about. Yeah.
Another way, like, do we have another tool than the ledger to sign the sign the application? Because maybe there is, I just don't know. I cannot like, bring my ledger every day during the work. That's so dangerous for me.
Yeah.
Money inside it,
Yeah, that makes sense. I mean, that makes sense. I think worth thinking about. Yeah, don't know. Guess any other thoughts on this one? Oh, make a program similar to bug bounties. Is the suggestion there that like depending on like if people are able to find valid like disputes, you basically give a little bounty for it? If so, like I think that generally makes sense. Just need to figure out where we want to get the funding for and where like we'd be able to draw that line.
Quick question, Deep.
Yes.
I feel like we talked about the automation of the audit trail at some point, and it might be in the pipeline.
Yes.
But I'm not sure that I know I don't I don't do it as frequently as I could, or I might be missing things. But how might we do the audit better? So how do we detect the misuse more efficiently?
I think part of it is like we have a ground out already for like audit services being built on like tracking down what abuse of the system looks like and how to publish that. We also have like the stats, the dashboard that we were building out that's now publishing via the stats spot. It shows us like how many search providers deals are being made with and like the average deal profile. So we have like a preliminary level of analysis already coming. We've already gotten a ground out for a secondary level, which will be more robust. And we've got like a couple of companies that are interested in helping the Fil Plus community in general at like an even deeper level. And so once we get some, I think once we get some better proposals, I'd love to just invite them to this call, hopefully. Cool. So I'm really hoping in the next few calls, we get some folks in here that are like experts in the KYC space and can chat through some of their proposals and ideas. So definitely things coming down the pike on that front. Just looking forward to sharing those with you guys soon.
That soft play in. Deep, I know that we had talked in the morning. Do you want to bring that up again on this afternoon call?
Sure. Yeah, I think so. I think just separately, I guess, is a net new discussion topic that I flagged in the morning. I was just doing a little bit of thinking. I was wondering if there's any benefit to running the retrieval bots that we have for Slingshot on Fil Plus as well. So specifically, we run a retrieval testing service for Slingshot where a deal bot attempts to retrieve data from places where it should have been stored with fast retrieval available and open for retrieval. And we get a lot of Filecoin Plus customers claiming that they're storing data in a way that should be accessible to everybody and there's a public data set. But we don't actually test that. And it could be interesting to test that for several reasons. I think the first is it would give Filecoin Plus its own opinion on high quality or well-reputed search providers that we could feed into the reputation service and share with incoming clients to make sure they're successful. It also gives us yet another audit check. So speaking of audit things, it gives us another audit check and the quality of like how we're testing clients and the robustness of our understanding of how they behave on the network. So it could be pretty interesting from that angle. And last, certainly not least, it gives us an ability to sort of like really measure the productive output of the program, not just in terms of data that's stored, but also in terms of data that's accessible. And so I wanted to just sort of test the waters with like, what could it look like if we ran a Fil Plus specific like retrieval attempting service with a dashboard for like all the deals that were claimed to be retrievable based on what we're getting from client applications, what's actually available for retrieval. And I guess pulse check purely, like what are people's reactions to that, especially for those of you that are familiar with how we do it in Slingshot. Looking at you, Charles.
Slingshot, very good thing.
You think what?
Oh, well, Slingshot is a really good story. Like we learn a lot, right?
Yeah, exactly. So I feel like it could be useful here, right?
Yeah, actually, like Slingshot is really useful for some people like me. Like we practice a lot. We use Slingshot to get lots of interesting work. Also, like polishing our tools, which is really interesting.
Yeah, I think so. So specifically what I'm pitching is, how we do the RSR part on Slingshot, the retrievability success, just bringing that part and running like a Fil Plus specific instance for all the clients that we know that are claiming that all the data they're uploading is available and just testing against that. Like, I think it could be pretty compelling.
Yeah. And I think the things will be getting better, like with more experience that we have with those governance. And also more tools put into usage. So maybe after 3 to 6 months, probably we have a good tool to check the availability about the data retrieval. And from the experience that we recently working with Lotus, it's much better in performance for the data retrieval. So I think probably in next few months, we can bring the retrieval success rate as a criteria sometime in the future. Because from what we tested, retrieval is really working now, fine now. If people like have lots of, especially like sometimes I really like feel strange about people say like I have some pictures and I need 1 petabyte storage. Sometimes I was thinking that we really know like how many pictures there will be with 1 petabyte storage.
Yeah,
I have those kind of doubts for them, and prefer to get some testing.
yeah,
Maybe we need to have a separate program called retrieval testing, led by a team or some bounties or whatever it is, just like a reference, independent team who doing the job. Then we can check what the hell is they saving on the system. We need to check. I get some people was saying that history, get some like images not properly served on their node or something like that. So it's really worth it to have a team or bounty or project, whoever interested in working on it.
yeah. That makes sense. So like getting a grant out basically and help them get that set up and run that effectively externally if required. That makes sense to me. Sweet. I think that's about it, Carrie, for me. I don't know if anybody else has any other things they wanted to flag or chat about today.
Oh, I just have one question, Dave, actually, and I'm pretty sure I asked this last time, Kevin, but I've forgotten what the answer is. For those that need to reapply, how do you want us to do that?
So you're welcome to just reuse your application or like copy over most elements of it. Just as a heads up, like some of the questions have changed.
Yeah.
And so the best practice recommendation is just apply again. Feel free to copy over whatever is still relevant from your old application. So that should speak.
Oh, okay. Just either use the same one or apply in a new one.
No, let's just say definitely apply in a new one, but you're welcome to copy stuff over.
Okay.
Yeah, and the benefit of applying in a new one also gives us the chance to track scoring trends for the same applicants over time, which then gives us feedback over time on the rubric changes we're making. So it's actually beneficial to have like snapshots like over time.
Okay, got it.
Yeah. So that would be great. Thank you.
Too easy.
Sweet.
All right. Well, with that, we'll stop the recording here in just one moment. If anybody would like to hang out on the line, talk with us. Oh,
yeah. I just noticed that there were a couple of things in the chat that we didn't react to. Charles Cow, noting that he wants 10% back of the reward from the client he found it to be dishonest. Reward yeah, I think that's a joke.
Just kidding. There's no way to do that. Maybe FVM can help doing that.
Maybe FVM can.
Yeah, it doesn't do that.
Yeah,
yes, we can ask I know we currently don't have enough notary. If we have so many notaries, ask them to put the deposit.
Yeah.
They say that they have deposit, right? When they're doing application, I have 2,000, 20,000. Okay, put 10% of that to the.
Yeah, I think that's a staking is a very interesting idea here.
Exactly, this camera they have so much. And Filecoin, so that eligible to large DataCap.
Yeah.
Then why not just put there, like make use of it?
True. And then there was also a question from Alessandro. I'm sorry if I'm saying your name wrong, by the way. Please correct me sometime if I am. Do we have any stats on the cost of daily, weekly retrievals to use? That's a great question. So I actually run the DealBot service for Slingshot, so I can actually check on this and actually come back with stats before we action it into a proposal. Yeah.
Yeah, I can tell you that each time when you check it, you triggered our alarm system, says that we lost a sync somehow.
You lost what?
Yeah, there are some nodes we are not split the market yet. So when you're running it, we notice that we lost a sync with looters. But the good news is that you didn't run it 24 hours per day. So it's just a temporary loss, but and we are not doing the win post at the moment. So it's fine. So that's not something that we don't know. We know that. We still
you need to split your markets code. You got to split your markets code, sir.
I have 10 nodes. Not every node is splitted.
Why?
Some client didn't pay for that. So they didn't pay for that. We're
Fair
giving
enough.
them the separate note, right?
Ah, fair enough. That's fair. Reasonable. Sweet. Well, that's that then, I guess.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.